tell you an old Chinese folk tale. A long time ago, there lived an old Chinese man and his wife, Mr. Hok-Tak and Mrs. Hok-Tak. They lived in a very small hut with only a tiny garden outside where they grew their vegetables. Good years, when they had extra harvest, they took it into the neighboring village to trade for clothes and sometimes oil, fresh vegetables, and meat. One spring, when Mr. Hok-Tak was out digging in his garden to get ready to plant, he came across something very hard in the ground. He dug and he dug, and he discovered an old brass pot in his garden. My, Mr. Hok-Tak thought, all these years I've gardened, never come across a big brass pot. How strange. I will take it home to show Mrs. Hok-Tak. Maybe she can think of a use for it. And as Mr. Hok-Tak worked to carry that big pot home, he dropped his gold bag, his bag of gold coins. He only owned 5 coins in the world. This was his fortune. For safekeeping, he put the bag into the pot. Then he took the pot home. Mrs. Hok-Tak, he called. I found this pot in the garden. Mrs. Hok-Tak looked the pot over. She said, I cannot think of what to do with this pot. It's very large, too big to cook in, certainly too big to take a bath in. I wonder what we could do with this pot. Mrs. Hok-Tak was looking the pot over. She leaned in and dropped her one and only hairpin into the pot. Oh dear, she called. She reached inside to pull out her hairpin. And as she pulled and looked around, she found not only her hairpin, but a hairpin that was exactly like her hairpin. And not only one bag, but another identical bag with 5 gold coins inside. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And another 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Mr. Hok-Tak and Mrs. Hok-Tak were very excited. Mr. Hok-Tak said, let me take my winter coat and put it inside the pot. Then perhaps we will have 2 warm coats for the winter. And they did, and they found another coat in the pot. They put their teapot in. Now they had 2 teapots. Mr. Hok-Tak thought, if only we had some fresh meat, some fresh vegetables, maybe a delicious cake to put in the pot, we could have more meat and vegetables. But Mrs. Hok-Tak thought, oh, I have an idea. We shall take our 10 coins, put them in one bag, put them in the pot. Then let's see if we will have another bag of 10 gold coins. So they did. They took out one bag of 10 gold coins and another bag of 10 gold coins. What a fortune, cried her husband. So all that night long, the Hok-Taks put bags of gold coins into the pot and brought out gold coins from the pot. They worked all night long, covering their floor with gold coins, until at last, tired, they fell asleep. In the morning, Mr. Hok-Tak took his bag of gold coins into the village so that he could buy fresh vegetables, fresh meat, delicious pies, some oil for their lamp. While he was gone, Mrs. Hok-Tak tidied the house up. And then she sat down to rest with a nice cup of tea. As she sat with her tea, She gazed at the pot, admiring the pot and their great fortune. She said to the pot, "Oh, pot, you are my best friend." And she went to give the pot a big hug. And just as she was peering into the pot, who should come home but Mr. Hawk-Talk, loaded down with bags. He banged on the door, which startled Mrs. Hawk-Talk, who fell into the pot. Mr. Hawk-Talk rushed over to pull her out. And he no sooner got Mrs. Hawk-Talk out of the pot than they noticed another pair of legs sticking out of the pot. Out came another Mrs. Hawk-Talk, who looked very confused and lost. Mrs. Hawk-Talk cried to Mr. Hawk-Talk, "What need have you for another wife? I am your only wife. Let's put her back in the pot, and then you will not, and let's put her back in the pot." Mr. Hawk-Talk said, "No, no, if we put her in the pot, I will end up with 3 wives. I have no need for 3 wives. 1 is enough for me." Mrs. Hawk-Talk was still rather angry, and Mr. Hawk-Talk backed away, and as he backed away, he tumbled into the pot. Both Mrs. Hawk-Talks rushed over to pull Mr. Hawk-Talk out of the pot. And no sooner had they gotten Mr. Hawk-Talk out of the pot than they noticed another pair of legs. And there was another Mr. Hawk-Talk. Now there was 2 Mrs. Hawk-Talks and 2 Mr. Hawk-Talks. Mr. Hawk-Talk said, "What good is another Mr. Hawk-Talk? I do not need another Mr. Hawk-Talk. This pot is nothing but trouble." But Mrs. Hawk-Talk was thinking. She said, "Now calm down, husband. Perhaps this is not so bad. Now the new Mrs. Hawk-Talk has her own Mr. Hawk-Talk. And we may become all good friends. She may be like a sister to me, and he may be like a brother to you." And this is exactly what they did. They took their great fortune, they built 2 beautiful houses, identical houses, with exactly the same pots and rice dishes. But in one of the houses, there was, hidden away in a corner, a brass pot. And Mr. and Mrs. Hawk-Talk were careful never to fall into the pot again. If you like this story, you might like to read the book, Twoofeverything by Lily Toy Hong.